Thank you, Alicia, and good day to everyone. So let me just bring over my presentation and we'll get started. Perfect. So this is exactly kind of a segue, or that was a great segue into this presentation, that last comment from Ong on how this philosophical aspect of how enterprise architecture needs to really step into the humanity, step into the what is the board talking about, and really get out of the depths of detail design and detail architecture. And this is why the title of my presentation is oriented towards really positioning enterprise architects as internal management consultants. And that important part is the management consulting. What we typically see is you have people with business degrees going into management meetings and trying to identify strategies, definitely talking business strategy, business models, even marketing topics, which markets are being addressed. And we see that we're going to look at how given the kind of current environment in how companies are trying to transform, how companies are trying to gain advantage and differentiate, but especially transform their business models with digital transformation that is happening. Enterprise architects are really well positioned to gain or enter this role within the management teams and really act as a consulting partner to those management teams that are trying to reach this transformation. So let's look at the aspects first of what typical business transformation right now is focusing on and struggling with as well. So we typically see business transformation really focusing on trying to set a clear mission and vision. This goes all the way to then also understanding what are the roadmaps that will take us towards the new business models that we've identified. So I think a lot of the discussions that happen today within enterprise architecture do touch on business models. But we need to get more comfortable with that because that is what the language of the board is very typically. It's also about connectivity. A lot of the discussions that are happening are how do we connect our people, our data, our processes to each other. And this is something that really drives the operationalization and what really then changes the way we do things within the organization. The thing that would also help us guide how this all happens is this excellence towards customer experience. So it's definitely a big topic within the management boards. How do our customer journeys look like? What do we want our customer to experience in the future as a guiding light towards where we want to get to with that technology that we want to involve in those journeys? Of course, still a key is speed in digital innovation. So the technology trends that we as architects are aware of, but also that certain specialty teams within the organization might be most comfortable with, might be experts in. This is where the technology trends are actually bringing us new ideas, enabling that differentiation in our customer journeys, in our processes, in our data. And also an important aspect, and last here but not least, is the cybersecurity aspect of things. So as architects, we very typically consider within our designs security, but this shift left approach that has been introduced a couple of years ago to really think of security by design, really from the start of our thought process, from the start of our ideation on how we could deliver and what we should deliver within our architecture to transform the business, really focusing on security from the start, which allows a much wider freedom for the actual definition and the solution that we deliver, since we are considering security already from the beginning. So as you can see, all of these aspects are very much at the top of mind of many boards and many organizations that are trying to transform. But these are also very clearly matching what enterprise architects typically are involved in, especially at those higher levels of abstraction. And this is something that we see within BOC Group as an important aspect that architects can reposition and kind of really be brought into the discussion of what management is trying to achieve. All of this happens within an organization, obviously. So organizations that are trying to transform, we're saying that these are very flexible teams that are working in these transformation projects. We see digital business teams composed of managers, DevOps teams, innovation leads, business experts, marketing experts, customer journey and business architecture experts, but also importantly here, enterprise architects. And enterprise architects, what they bring to this table is a lot of what we've been hearing within the sessions before today. So you bring frameworks, obviously, you bring methods, and these methods, we have to get more comfortable with the methods that are of this higher level of abstraction, but in higher detail, as we were hearing before in the last mention from our speakers in the conference. So this is where architects are really well positioned to contribute. And we want to be able to kind of foster this collaboration within this level of team, and having such teams that are, you know, multi-skilled, but also collaborating on based on frameworks that we are using as guidance to the work we're doing. So rather than saying, hey, like Aaron said, let's just use our gut. We're all smart people. Let's work together and see where we land. Actually, architecture gives us a lot of the frameworks on how to get this done. There's also other practices that bring structure. In this case, we'll see some of those practices, especially in the design thinking world, but also simply in the business architecture world. We see a lot of frameworks that we can leverage to actually guide these teams through this. And there are very key questions that these teams would like to typically focus on. And this is what we're going to kind of start looking at. What are the key questions? What are the typical questions that we see these teams being challenged with? So important things are, what are the strategic roadmaps look like? So what are we going to focus on as a team, so that we focus all of our expertise, all our multi-knowledge into transforming the business in the most efficient way. Typically, we ask then, what are the capabilities we need to improve? What are the areas of business to first focus on, to then start looking at, okay, what customer journeys do we want to define as our new targets? What is the business model that is being applied here, and are we changing that significantly? So that's the typical questions we see. We see questions around, what is a value chain that we need to adapt? So we currently have value chains in the organization. We also see customer journeys that we want to adapt. What are those changes, and how are they going to affect, or even how does technology enable us to change and improve those journeys for our customers? What data sources are available, and what data products are there that we can leverage? A lot of these multifunctional teams that are working in digital transformation projects, they come from their own silos, and ideally come out of those silos to work together, but they still are in many ways limited by the structure, the availability of the data that typically also lives in those silos that they are working with. So this is an important aspect, because obviously a lot of our business models and a lot of our journeys are now driven by the data we can make available to them. Even if we bring in great technology, data will always play a key role in enabling these transformations. We talked about what rising technologies might there be that we can leverage. There might be technologies that we're already testing in the organization, we might be piloting, but there might be also technologies that our competitors are piloting, or even other industries. So being aware of what rising technologies are out there, us as enterprise architects, obviously it's something that we're more comfortable with being aware of and being involved in, bringing these new technologies in. But this is also something that these teams struggle with. And of course, a very traditional aspect, what are the effects on our current application landscape? What are the elements we might need to invest in, or bring up to speed to match the demands that our new business models have, our new value streams, our new customer journeys have, and really talking about the reasons why these changes need to be done, the reasons why the application landscape needs to be changed from a higher level, meaning from the why being the business model, the business change, and not necessarily because a certain technology is deprecated or because a certain technology is not performing as we'd like it. So really changing the way that the architect collaborates and contributes, and also communicates within these multifunctional teams. All of this is really kind of brought down or broken down into, we as enterprise architects need to be user-centric. User-centric, not necessarily to the end user or our customer, but we need to think of our internal customers. As we said, we are trying to see how enterprise architects can act as an internal management consulting team. And this user centricity also speaks to this ability to understand our internal customer, also the external one, obviously, but define our actions, our strategy, our focus points based on the business outcomes we want to achieve, and not necessarily or stepping out of the maybe more traditional sense of how architects worked in the past, saying, okay, we're trying to govern over what's happening. We're trying to paint a single picture of the whole organization. And rather than acting like a policing party within the organization, try to take this role of being more collaborative, enabling, contributing with our knowledge of frameworks, almost as a guidance to the multifunctional, multi-purpose teams that are transforming the organization, and really focusing ourselves, our expertise in these high value activities that really drive that transformation forward, and that also enrich other team members' ability to bring their knowledge into the table. What's important is at the end to still track the performance that we are achieving. So really focusing on how we can prove or essentially give light to the progress that we're contributing to within our architecture context. And this is really kind of what we want to focus on as an architecture team. How do we use this user-centric approach, and how do we make sure that we're speaking in the right language to the right audience always? As we try to transform this, we believe that giving a more of a guiding collaborative approach to architecture has a much bigger impact on the collaboration that happens than and on the business outcomes that are achieved. So some of the methods and some of the you're going to start hearing me say is these user-centric services, or the when we want to be architects and we want to contribute in this kind of multi-skilled approach within these digital business teams, we want to do different things. So for example, we want to help with strategic road mapping as a key activity. As we saw, this is a key question that we typically have. We want to also help out and guide this application investment planning. So what are the different team members focusing on in terms of assessing what applications should be invested on? The capability-based planning, that is a very typical way of starting within architecture, also a key part of how these teams would approach the digital transformation challenges. Technology trend scouting is also something that we see happening more and more. We see, of course, a lot of analyst agencies and consulting firms doing a lot of work around this field, simply being aware of what's out there and what we could leverage within the organization. Always an important activity to also keep as a running track of, you know, what is out there, what are we already testing, what are we evaluating, what is already in use in the organization, to see obviously where there might be opportunity and potential from actually learning and becoming experts within the context of a specific technology. And also in terms of the tracking of progress and giving a big picture to everyone in the organization, this strategy on a page topic, which is a service that a lot of our customers now are looking to kind of bring in and leverage within the different phases of this user-centric service and user-centric EA. It really allows us to communicate why and where we're positioned within the organization, what are we currently working on as an architecture team, but also within the digital transformation projects that are happening. The strategy on the page also allows us and allows those teams to tell their story. So we're, as architects, always able to use our own methods and tools for ourselves, but also we want to be able to share those with others to allow them to benefit from the same storytelling capabilities, from the same, you know, drilling down, but also drilling up, and having that detail within the strategy on the page is really something that we see value from within those teams. So now I want to break kind of down. We talked about the names of those user-centric services. I want to break down what makes up a user-centric service within an EA context for us, and also then talk about some examples of those. What does it really look like when we're doing this, what we call user-centric EA service? So it's really, at a bare minimum, it's really made of 3 parts. We have the steps that need to be taken. So it's a sequence of activities, a sequence of frameworks, very typically, that lead us to an outcome. And as enterprise architects, we've learned those sequences. Maybe to us, they're very familiar, they're very obvious, but we want to kind of simplify them, make them clear to everyone, and speak to the reason why we take these steps, always an important part. We use tools. I mentioned frameworks. We might use tools in terms of the digital collaboration aspect, design thinking aspect as well. So we may use different tools, different methods, different frameworks to really step through those steps and guide us in our progress. And we also typically use a modeling language. So we agree on the graphical notation or the structure of how we will document what we're going to work on. And those three things at a bare minimum are what make up our user-centric EA services. Let's look at some examples of how this all takes place. So the steps we've talked about are quite clear. It's how we get to the goal, here being the business goal itself, obviously. The tools, again, the selection of frameworks that we might use. We might be starting with a pestle for understanding what is the market trends, economic, social, environmental aspects that we talked about makes the architecture human. We might look at even more top of the funnel type of business frameworks like a SWOT analysis or like a business model canvas, a value stream map. We might see a technology radar as part of these tools that we use. But the important thing is, of course, what steps we take. And of course, last but not least, what is the common language that we use? So in a lot of cases, we're very comfortable with using languages like Archimates, like BPMN, like UML. And of course, these languages are very helpful, but we need to understand, is this a common language that everyone in the room speaks? Or can we just leverage that language and visualize whatever we want to communicate in a way that is already simplified enough that even if you're not a language expert on Archimate or BPMN or UML, you can still contribute and have a level of communication that is still aligned, is still agreed upon, but doesn't necessarily bring the complexities of a full language definition here. So let's take a look at a first example. We saw it before. Strategic road mapping plays a key role in focusing our team into what we're going to do actually, and what sequence of action we're going to take. So that's also a very important first step, usually, once we identify some key issues to address. So we might start, for example, from a strategic road mapping perspective with a very outside-in approach. So we look at what is happening in the world in terms of the factors that we said: economic, technological, environmental, social aspects that are happening. And we try to identify challenges, opportunities that come out of that. So this is a very much of an ideation exercise using pestle. What we're using from a modeling language, this is also how we're kind of translating the work here, is we're technically using drivers and assessments within the context of Archimate. Not necessarily something we need to explain to everyone in the meeting, but we need to agree that we're going to be using a framework like pestle. We're collaborating on defining what are the factors that are now affecting our organization, but also our markets, the markets where we operate, the customers that we interact with. What are those aspects that are changing the world, how we see it, are changing the demands of our customers, are changing the dynamics of the economy that we live in, and therefore identifying opportunities that we would want to address, we would want to be a player in and an early mover on. So this is typically something that we would see happening at the very first step. At a second step, we want to see, okay, what courses of action have we identified? And can we define or assign those courses of action to a certain existing project or an existing multifunctional team? Meaning, once we have findings from what we see as a potential opportunity for the business to move into, we need to find what is the right team or the right transformation team to put this within, or to group this under, so that it can be picked up as a kind of either a new target or a business goal, and therefore be worked on to actually detail out how we want to achieve that, what would be the steps, what would be the capabilities, the investments that we need to make to really explore this opportunity. So this is where we typically see these kind of courses of action and the mapping of those courses of action to the different projects that we're identifying and already working on. What comes from there typically, then we need to start specifying requirements. These requirements come from different methods. We might start with first thinking of a customer journey. We'll get to that in a second. But once we've defined and identified requirements, we want to start prioritizing those requirements. So we typically see teams focusing on or using an Eisenhower matrix to prioritize these requirements. So from a list of requirements, we try to define, first of all, the urgency of those requirements, as well as the importance they have towards achieving this business outcome. And this is what then ideally triggers a specific action or course of action where we eliminate a particular requirement because it's not urgent or important, whether we schedule or actually put on the to-do list, or we even outsource or put to the side a specific set of requirements that might not be as high importance or urgency. So this also helps push teams into decision-making, even at the requirements definition stage. When we're defining requirements and we're deciding what are we going to work on first, what is our roadmap of strategic roadmap look like? And as all of you know, strategy, it usually means it really focuses on making decisions, and the strategy is typically a decision-making process about what we do and what we do not do. And methods like the one we see here, and bringing that into the steps of our strategic road mapping really ensures that in the end, we're not just coming up with a huge, great list of ideas of what we want to do, but that we're actually prioritizing and deciding on what is it that we're going to do today, tomorrow, next quarter, and what are we not doing. And that typically is something that we leave out of a lot of the architecture work, this decision-making step. But we see that as a key part of making those actions and those contributions of EA really bring value to the organization, is when we start making those decisions and we start guiding those decisions, perhaps not in the architecture team itself, but rather as enterprise architects, as members of a transformation team, as members of a consulting team that is helping the business make those decisions. But we're the ones putting this step into the frameworks. We're putting this step into kind of the guidance that we're bringing. And that's what really drives our transformation. And last but not least, we're of course going to visualize those requirements on our Eisenhower matrix and decide what we do, what we plan, what we delegate, and what we delete from our activities. So this is obviously a very simple but very powerful tool that we're using in this 4th step. And last but not least, this is really the more kind of really what the outcome of all of this is. We've prioritized the elements, we've decided what we're actually going to focus on, and then we start placing those on, using a Kanban view, on the different planning horizons that we've defined. So we might be working in quarters, we might be working in sprints, and we start prioritizing those requirements based on that definition that we did on schedule, plan, eliminate, and start defining the ones that we're going to leave open, for example, those that were in eliminate, but also scheduling those that were of higher priority or higher importance. And that's what really starts turning into, from taking an ideation kind of workshop from this pestle concept, all the way into having a roadmap of what we're going to start working on for the next couple of periods. And that's really what we see, or one example of what we see as an EA user-centric service. You're taking different methods, different frameworks, putting them in a certain sequence of steps, using them to drive a certain outcome, using obviously a specific language to do so. And that's where we see, or kind of once we've gone through these steps, once we've gone through this user-centric approach, this is where we then can step into the traditional, or what we see, the more detailed, granular documentation of solution architecture, and starting to look at each requirement and looking at what is the best way of architecting that. And this is where we, of course, jump back into our comfort zone, perhaps. But we must start from that business-centric approach that we had before. We must start in a collaborative environment. And only then, only when we reach this kind of outcomes, can we go into our more kind of deep dive, 30 meters down into the architecture of what we want to drive. Here, we still encourage that architecture teams take the outputs of the previous exercises. So, for example, you might go into designing the, processes and let me just zoom in here. You might be looking at the processes, the capabilities, the data, applications, but we don't want to forget about the business outcomes, the targets that we're measuring. And that typically also comes from, for example, marrying two frameworks together. We might still have very visible here our customer journey. And then we still see how we are focusing on specific steps in our journey that we want to improve. This is our target journey. And we're now defining how those particular steps are now being affected by the value stream that they're part of, the capability, data, applications. And this is kind of a smaller step towards the solution architecture, but we're still keeping in mind where we came from, where we started, and allowing us to continue to communicate within the team that we started with, the multidisciplinary business transformation team, and really keeping that storyline going, but still stepping one level deeper without going all the way to the level of detailed solution architecture, perhaps, but bringing everyone on the same page of what are we going to do next? What is it that we're going to invest in? And how does that look like architecturally without breaking away fully from this kind of more business level discussion? So last, as a summary, things to keep in mind as we are building and acting in a user-centric way as enterprise architects. We need to keep it simple. So it's always, of course, or in our best interest to do so, even though this goes against maybe our typical nature. So we're all subject matter experts, but we are talking to experts in different levels of the business. Even within our transformation teams, there are different expertise. So by keeping it simple, we're allowing everyone to contribute. And that's what really drives the progress. We want to stay focused on the business model why. So the question that we want to say and focus on why is really around the business model. It's also important. And we want to still substantiate the what. What is it that we're solving? What is the opportunity for the business that we want to address? And then linking this why and the what together. This is what we're experts at. We're architects. We try to link things and try to find the requirements, the roadmaps. This is where we're going to thrive, obviously. But we want to do this all with an aspect of promoting collaboration, connecting people, and really bringing design aspect and design thinking approach into our architecture practices for getting better and faster results. And that is the end of my presentation. So thank you very much for your time. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them now or, of course, after the session.
Thank you, Henry.